On today's episode, I'll be talking about the 1984 original Red Dawn.
If you're looking for a man with no plans or programs, and he always leaves a chance to hold hands for romance. Are you looking for the Luke with an old man, a cold hands? It's a creature of the night who heads for his spotlight. I'm here to welcome you to Brandon at Random Reviews. No method when I choose. It's Brandon at Random Reviews. Yeah.
All right, everyone, welcome to Brandon at Random Reviews, covering one unsystematically chosen topic at a time. If you like listening to a guy recap and review movies, then look no further. To keep up with the newest content, you can find Brandon at Random Reviews on most major video and audio platforms, as well as all popular social media sites. If you enjoy this, please like and subscribe, and maybe drop me a nice rating on your app of choice. That really helps me out a lot. Like I said, today's movie is Red Dawn, released on August 10th, 1984. Runtime 114 minutes. This movie is rated PG-13 for glorification of shouting the word Wolverines excitedly by the Motion Picture Association of America. This was supposedly the first film to receive the PG-13 rating. Gremlins and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom were two films that preceded this that were arguably what drove the MPAA to create the rating. Before this, there was only G, PG, R, and X/NC-17. Budget $17 million, directed by John Milius. He also directed the movie Conan the Barbarian with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't think I've ever actually watched that movie. I don't know that it's really my kind of movie, but I'm also kind of curious if it's like a good one, if it's like fun to watch. It could be. I'm not really sure. I know it's kind of well regarded, but I also don't think it's like a super highbrow type movie. And I want to be clear that this director, John Milius, is better known as a writer, and luckily he was also a writer on this movie. So for writers, we have Kevin Reynolds, and then we have John Milius, who also was a writer on the movie Apocalypse Now, which is regarded as one of the best movies ever made, but I find it to be a terrible bore. I just don't think it's that good of a movie. It's based on a book that I also found very, very boring, which is called Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. He was a writer on the movie Clear and Present Danger with Harrison Ford, and I remember that movie just being okay. Like the two Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan movies that Harrison Ford was in were both kind of mediocre to me, but maybe I'm alone in that. I just don't think they were that great. And he also wrote on the movie 1941, which was a notorious flop and was supposedly not particularly good. I've never sat down and made a point to watch it, but I was just looking recently at the credits on that movie, and there were so many good people involved in that movie that it is shocking to me that it is so notoriously bad. Like Robert Zemeckis was a writer on that, and he became like a big time director on a lot of really popular movies. Steven Spielberg directed it. I mean, there's a lot of good things going on for that movie to have been considered as bad as it was. For the composer, we have Basil Polidoris, who did the score for the movie RoboCop from 1987, the original with Peter Weller. I love the score of that movie. I think it's fucking terrific. The theme for RoboCop is amazing in my opinion. I'm really fucking not exaggerating at all. He also did the score for the movie Free Willy, which I covered last season when I was starting to shift back to these full walkthrough type episodes. And honestly, I don't really remember. The only thing I remember music-wise about that movie is Will You Be There by Michael Jackson being at the end of that movie. I think that was like the most memorable musical thing about it. I don't remember anything else about the score. If I went back and listened to or watched my episode on that movie, I might have mentioned it. I can't remember. And he also did the score for The Hunt for Red October. I seem to remember that being a pretty decent score, but I can't really remember for sure. And then for the cast, we have Patrick Swayze, who plays Jed Eckert. He was also, of course, in Dirty Dancing, which is a favorite of my family's. My mom and sister really loved that movie. They watched it all the time when I was growing up, and I kind of grew to like it. It was always a bit of a chick flick to me, and it didn't really appeal to me that much, but I started to really enjoy it, and I thought it was a good one. He was also in the movie Roadhouse, and if you're a loser, you think he played a bouncer in that movie, but in reality, he played a cooler in that movie, and he was a bit of a badass. I mean, that movie is a little over the top and ridiculous, but I also do kind of like it. I mean, it's really a fun watch. It's enjoyable. It's kind of badass, but it's very outrageous. I mean, honestly. And he was also in the movie Point Break with Keanu Reeves. I covered that earlier this season. Definitely check out that episode if you have any interest. I liked Point Break. I found it really entertaining, but it's another one of those ones that it's a popcorn movie. You're not going in watching it hoping for some critically acclaimed art house garbage, you know? C. Thomas Howell plays Robert Morris, and he was in E.T. the Extraterrestrial. I've mentioned this before, but I found that movie pretty terrifying as a kid, especially during certain sequences. Like when the government comes and all that stuff, it's really fucked up seeming, but I have watched it since, and it's a pretty solid movie. I mean, it's Spielberg, great fucking John Williams score in that movie, love it. He was in the movie Soul Man, which is, I believe it was released in the 1980s. It almost had to have been. And it is one of the most notoriously racist movies of all time. Like, it is frequently referenced as being racist because it's about a guy who I believe, I'm not positive because I've never seen it, but I believe he basically does something to alter his skin color so that he can get into college or something. And it's just in horribly bad taste. And you might even think, oh, well, it was the 80s, so maybe they got away with it. I don't think it went over that well in the 80s either. It might have been a little less of a backlash, but it was still not well regarded, I don't think. And he was also in the movie The Hitcher, which I've never actually watched, but it's supposed to be a pretty solid horror movie, I believe. I'm not positive. I'd have to look it up again to remember for sure. Then we have Leah Thompson, who plays Erica Mason. She was in Back to the Future, at least I think all the Back to the Future movies. And I really enjoy her. I always, in Back to the Future, when I was younger, the first time I saw it, I thought she was super attractive, honestly. Not the scenes when she's like young and in high school. I mean, like when they have her all made up to look old. That's what really does it for me. She was in the god awful first ever Marvel movie, Howard the Duck. That one has, I think, it's a Tim Robbins. I can't even remember who voices Howard the Duck in that movie, but I just remember that movie just being so awful. I watched it deliberately for some reason. I think it was because How Did This Get Made did an episode on it, but I really hated it. I thought it was terrible. And she was also in the TV show Caroline in the City. She played Caroline in that show, and I don't really remember what that show was all about. I just remember her being in it. Charlie Sheen plays Matt Eckert, and he was in the movie Platoon, which I've seen. It's a Vietnam War movie. I don't particularly remember a ton about it. I think the only reason I watched it is because there is a montage in the movie The Naked Gun, the original, with Leslie Nielsen, where Frank and Jane are going around like they're, having fun together and falling in love and stuff. And there's a scene where they come out of a movie theater laughing like they just saw the funniest movie ever. And the camera pans up and it reveals that that they just went and saw the movie Platoon, which is a notoriously devastating and sad movie. And I don't know. I find it really funny. Like, people just the Zucker brothers are fucking amazing. I love their humor. Sort of speaking of which, he was also in Hot Shots. He played, I think his character's name is Topper Harley in that movie, and it's a spoof of Top Gun predominantly. It spoofs other movies, of course. I think it spoofs like 8.5 Weeks at one point and a few others. There's some really good people in that movie. It's that kind of slapstick humor like The Naked Gun and Airplane and things like that. But I don't think that the people that made, like, I don't think the Zucker brothers actually made that movie or were involved in it at all. And Charlie Sheen was also in Two and a Half Men, most notoriously, and he kind of left that show in disgrace. I think he said some anti-Semitic things about the creator of the show, maybe. I can't remember the whole story, but basically, like, Charlie Sheen was on a ton of drugs. And I mean, that show, it's the same guy who made The Big Bang Theory and other shows like that. I mean, like, he's made a bunch of these types of shows, and there are a lot of these shows, not all of them, but a lot of them are ones that get criticized as being laugh track type shows where if they didn't have the laugh track going on in the show, people wouldn't think of them as being as funny as they are. Like, if you've ever watched one of those clips on YouTube where somebody removed the laugh track from scenes in those types of shows, it is painful how awful the jokes are. It's like you're sitting there watching it and it doesn't even make sense. Like, why did they write this joke into this? It wasn't even funny at all. Then we have Darren Dalton, who plays Daryl Bates, and honestly the only thing I had really seen him in other than Red Dawn was The Outsiders. He plays Ponyboy Curtis, and honestly, he's probably one of the very few people who was in The Outsiders that didn't go on to have like a huge fucking career, including who all's in it. It's like Tom Cruise, Patrick Swayze, Matt Dillon, Ralph Macchio, like all of these fucking people. And it's like, what, like, holy shit. Like, it's like a Francis Ford Coppola movie, who, as far as I know, Francis Ford Coppola is a bit of a garbage person. But leaving that aside, it was a book you had to read, like, at least I had to read in middle school. And I mean, it's a solid story, and all the characters have ridiculous names like Soda Pop and Pony Boy, but it's a pretty good one, and it's just got a lot of great people in it. Last but not least, we have Jennifer Grey, who plays Toni Mason. She was in Dirty Dancing, of course. That's like her biggest claim to fame, is having been in that movie. It's a movie I just talked about with Patrick Swayze, so I won't get back into that, but they obviously reunited after Red Dawn to be in that movie, and I'll get into it a little bit later, but the two of them were not big fans of each other, and they did not get along very well. And she was also the sister in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Jeannie, and I love her character in that movie. She is such a fucking bitch in that movie, but she does it so well, it's so enjoyable. For casting notes, the director wanted Robert Blake to play the role of the American pilot, but he was overruled by Frank Yoblins, who I guess is a producer or something, and Powers Booth was selected instead. This one was really tough to find casting notes on because I think most of these people were relative unknowns when they were in this movie, and so it probably wasn't that noteworthy. I mean, there might have been people that auditioned but I just could not find much on it. For the plot synopsis, when the Soviet Union invades American soil at the dawn of World War III, a group of high schoolers band together and use guerrilla tactics to defend their town and country. For the tagline, in our time, no foreign army has ever occupied American soil until now. That's kind of a terrible tagline. Like, it's not clever. I don't know. It's not even like the wording. It's like if they would have gone with a different wording, like just has ever occupied American soil, like even using the word invading would have been better there, but I digress. Alright, guys, let's just dive right into the plot of this motherfucking movie. So, this movie kicks off with the introductory on screen text explaining some major world events that kind of set up the premise. These are all supposed to be happening in close proximity leading up to present day 1984 when this movie came out. So the Soviet Union suffered its worst wheat harvest in 55 years. Labor and food riots occurred in Poland and Soviet troops invaded. Cuba and Nicaragua reached troop strength goals of 500,000. El Salvador and Honduras fell. The Greens Party gained control of West German parliament and demanded the withdrawal of nuclear weapons from European soil, which was apparently a real-life political party in Germany in the early 80s. I'm not sure what their status is now, but I believe this is what like one of their major goals was to remove all the nuclear weapons. Mexico was plunged into a revolution. NATO dissolved. NATO, for those that don't know, is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So it's kind of like a big deal. It's like this whole organization that like basically tries to like keep the peace, and the United States is just by itself. So long story short, the US is stuck all alone as the only military power among its allies, and the communists have basically been increasing the strength of their militaries while everyone else on the US's side of the fence has been doing the exact opposite in Europe. And then, of course, we get the actual introduction of the film where we're like rolling through clouds way up in the sky and the opening credits are playing. I also want to preface this by saying that when this movie came out, it was labeled as a bit of a propaganda film. It was referred to by some as a Republican wet dream, and it was labeled as very alarmist in nature and tended to glorify violence. 1983, the year before this movie came out, was arguably the most dangerous year of the Cold War when tensions were highest. The Cold War, for those that don't know, which ran from roughly 1947 to 1991, was a decades-long state of intense geopolitical, ideological, and economic struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union, or the USSR, and their allies following World War II. It was called Cold because the two superpowers never fought directly on a large scale, but instead competed through nuclear arms races, proxy wars, technological competition, and propaganda. So it's fairly likely that for a lot of people who watched this movie when it came out, it probably felt a lot more horrifying and gripping, and a lot less like just some escapist fantasy that could never happen. And of course, I didn't pick this movie because of anything that's going on in the world in particular right now, so don't read into that too much. The score is very 80s action epic as we're rolling through these clouds, and I just remember watching this movie for the first time and finding it very unsettling, even given the fact that I saw it like decades after it came out. I think the only reason I actually watched it for the first time was because they reference it in an episode of Scrubs, and I always want to, like, whenever things get referenced like that, I'm like, oh god, I gotta know what this movie's all about, and I had never even heard of it at that point. It finally dives into the actual film, and it says that it's September in some small mountain town called Calumet, Colorado. This is not a real town, at least not anymore. It was established in the early 20th century as a mining town and is now defunct. The version of it portrayed in the movie is fictionalized and far more populated than the actual place was at the time that this movie was made, because it was virtually abandoned at that point. It pans around the small town, showing shots of the different buildings and statues, including one of Teddy Roosevelt. Patrick Swayze's character Jed Eckert pulls up to a high school in his truck with his friend Robert Morris, who's played by C. Thomas Howell, and his brother Matt, who's played by Charlie Sheen. Jed explains to them that he's going to be busy at work all day and that they'll have to fend for themselves in order to find a ride home. Robert and Matt head up to the school as Jed drives away, and it just seems like kind of an ordinary day, but this movie wastes no fucking time getting right the hell into it while the history teacher is just teaching a class, and I want to say that Robert and Matt are in this class, and he looks out of a window, like all of the kids in the class are facing away from the windows toward him, and he can see what's going on outside and out through the windows, and he sees a ton of men coming down in parachutes toward a flare on the ground, and they're foreign soldiers from the Soviet Union. Also, by the way, I'm just going to point out that maybe parachuting directly into this populated area is not the best strategy if you're going for a more stealthy approach. It seems like you just try and be less obvious, maybe pick a more remote location. The teacher just kind of trails off as he's talking, as he's watching these parachutes coming down, and he goes outside to confront the men, but they speak Russian and immediately just shoot him with a machine gun. Of course, this act causes an immediate panic in the school, and all of the students and teachers begin attempting to flee the scene. Matt and Robert are seen getting into a vehicle that doesn't belong to them. It's like some kind of muscle car, and they're just going into it in hopes of finding some kind of refuge from all of these bad men with guns. But one of the Soviet soldiers opens fire on this vehicle and causes the hood to pop open, and basically like they have to rush to exit the car, and Jed is already circling back around in his truck trying to find them, and he tells them to get in the truck As they drive away, they nearly miss being hit by a missile from a bazooka that collides with a school bus, resulting in an explosion that's pretty fucking sweet. And it cuts to somewhere in town where the boys are coming through in the truck, and you can just see more paratroopers landing in the distance. Another soldier attempts to stop them, but they manage to escape. However, they're unable to help many people throughout this sequence who are clearly getting captured. Jed drives them to a gas station outside of town that is either worked at or owned by Robert's father, Samuel Morris. They suggest the possibility of heading up to the mountains to get away from the chaos and find safe haven for a while, and they point out that they heard some of the soldiers speaking Spanish as well. They gather food, weapons, and camping supplies from the gas station store, and they load everything into the back of their truck. Mr. Morris instructs them not to come back regardless of whatever they hear about what's going on in town, and he says that he'll be out there to retrieve them when the coast is clear. As the three of them head up toward the mountain in the truck, they find that there is a Soviet barricade on the road, and they quickly turn off to cut across a field where they're quickly fired upon by the Soviets. They're not hit directly, but the truck ends up damaged and broken down, and they meet three other guys who are also teenagers, Danny, Daryl, and Aardvark. I'm going to refer to these people very sparingly, and I apologize. It's a very weird thing I have to explain, but basically, like, this movie doesn't necessarily do the best job of making me remember who characters are, or at least what names they have, and they all look a lot alike if they're not the main three guys. They end up having to piss in the coolant reservoir for the radiator because they don't have any water to use like they normally would. For those that don't know, using water instead of coolant is only safe as a temporary emergency measure to prevent immediate engine overheating when no proper coolant is available. This is only to be used as an option in the most dire of circumstances. Long-term use of water for this purpose causes rust, corrosion, water pump damage, and potential engine failure. Water boils at way too low of a temperature, and it reduces the efficiency and risks overheating. One of the kids they meet is named Danny, and he's lucky enough to stand on the front of the truck and pee into the reservoir in front of all five of these guys. That night, the town is essentially a war zone, and a bad guy who legitimately looks like Joseph Stalin is seen walking around wearing a maroon beret, and his name is Colonel Bella. I don't know if it's Bella, but I could only see it spelled, so it might be Bella because he's supposed to be like Spanish, I think. I don't want to assume anything. One of his men informs him of the situation at hand and says that they have Yankee tanks coming in from the plains, and they've lost most of their night vision, and they only have a few anti-tank missiles left. He gives instructions to dig holes and plan to ambush the Americans with brute force. The colonel then instructs another man to go and search for records on gun ownership of citizens of the town. It cuts to the guys up in the mountains now, like these teenage kids, and a couple of them seem to be getting extremely restless because it's cold and they're afraid of being caught. Daryl, who is one of the two guys who are getting antsy, suggests that they should all just go and surrender, but Jed just tells everybody to shut the fuck up because it's too dangerous to go into town, and Daryl says they should at least put it to a vote, but Jed says no. But it pretty quickly turns into a big argument and a physical altercation where Daryl reminds Jed that this isn't a football game and he needs to stop acting like a jock. And I swear to God, these guys are so close to the bonfire that their fucking shins must have been sweltering because Jed could legitimately fuck Daryl up, by the way. Like, there's no fucking way Daryl is taking Jed. I mean, he's way too fucking imposing and huge. But I mean, seriously, like, they're standing there and this fire is like right at their feet. They're like practically standing in the pit. I don't know how they didn't like get farther away from this. But despite the heated exchange, Jed, Robert, and Matt make fast amends, and the other guys begrudgingly stay as well and agree to do as Jed says. Jed points out that he and his brother Matt were taught by their father how to survive in the wild and hunt and fish for food so that they can make it until the coast is clear, hopefully. We hit October and Robert shoots a deer with a rifle, and we get a little bit of an imparted wisdom moment from Jed as they find the fallen buck, and he warns them not to shoot a second time to ensure that the deer is dead, even though they instinctively want to. He explains to them that firing a second gunshot would allow them to be more easily located by enemies. As they begin gutting the deer, they insist that as part of a ritual that Jed and Matt did when they were younger, at the guidance of their father, they make Robert drink a cup of the animal's blood because it's his first time killing one. He apprehensively drinks the blood and repeatedly claims that it wasn't that bad, although I'm not sure who he's trying to convince with that. Like, it seems like he's trying to convince himself. That night, around the bonfire, the other guys are bothered by the notion of eating the hunted meat. But they also point out that it's been such a long time and that they need to head into town to see what's going on because they know it's possible that their parents might not be able to come get them, depending on what's happened. They return to the scene in the field where they were fired upon in the truck, and they see that the town appears to be functioning at a glance from a distance. And the dumb shit that Robert is, he almost rushes out of cover under the assumption that everything's actually fine. But upon closer examination, there still are very many military vehicles patrolling the road near the town, through the town, and it's pretty clear that the Soviets are still very much in control. They walk down the city streets, and it seems like they're not originally going to be confronted by the foreign military men. It's not really clear because, like, there aren't a bunch of other people out and about that they would blend in. Like, they stick out like a sore thumb. The three of them make their way to a local store and ask a female friend of theirs, or at least somebody that they seem to know, what's going on. And she explains to them that they've got to get out of town again as soon as possible. She says that the KGB is looking for them specifically. They know their names and what they look like. And we see that there's this officer patrolling up on this store is kind of weird. It's got like, it reminds me of like old libraries. Like it's got like a catwalk above, and this is where this guy is just walking. It doesn't make any sense to me that it's set up like this, but whatever. But he doesn't actually, like, he's up there watching them, but he doesn't come down and say, "Who the fuck are you guys?" And it doesn't make any sense. She explains that there's something she's not supposed to talk about that she's going to reveal to them so that they know about it. She says that enemy forces gathered a bunch of people and took them away after they determined that certain individuals might make trouble for them or that they had something that they might want. Jed asks where they were taken to, and she explains that they put them in something called a re-education camp that is at the drive-in. For those of you who don't know what a drive-in is, it's a type of movie viewing venue where people legitimately drive into what is essentially a big parking lot, and all of the spots face a large screen, and audio for the movie, at least originally, was typically transmitted through small speakers that are mounted near each of the parking spots that typically can be clipped onto the window of the driver's side door. And my God, that wiring for that must have been a nightmare way back when. Their appeal was the comfort of watching the movie from your car without having to sit in uncomfortable theater seats in crowded cinemas. Drive-ins peaked in popularity in the US in the 1950s with over 4,000 across the country. They became more of a novelty in more recent decades, but they have since seen a resurgence in popularity and also have made improvements in technology such as transmission of audio over FM frequencies to allow movie audio to be broadcast on car radios. And I'll just say that they're not ideal just because, like, if I recall correctly, it's still not great to see. Like, if you want to go with like a bunch of your friends and basically you're going for the experience of going, but it's not always easy. If you're not in the front seat and, you know, if there's a car in front of you that's bigger or whatever and they're not considerate, you can't see the movie for shit anyway. So you're really just going for the fun of going. And maybe you get out of your car and you sit on the grass near the car or something like that. It cuts to what is basically a modern concentration camp of sorts. Kind of reminds me of the refugee camp from the beginning of Scarface, where all of these random citizens are being held because they either had guns or valuable things or whatever. The guys wander around and finally locate a friend of the Eckert family and ask if they know where their father is, like Jed and Matt's dad. And the guy goes off to locate the dad. And he also says that he'll look for Robert's dad as well. Shortly thereafter, the man helps Jed and Matt's dad up to the fence, and he's played by Harry Dean Stanton, who looks very disheveled and out of sorts and pretty dirty, to be honest. When they try and talk to him, he stops them and tells them to just listen. And he explains that he was hard on them when they were growing up, but that he did it all for a reason and that it doesn't matter what happened to him that led to him being put in the camp, but he insists that they all need to do all they can to survive. It's very clear that their father has lost all hope for himself and others that are in the camp, and it gets very emotional as he talks about Jed and Matt growing up. He explains that he won't be around anymore to take care of them now, and they've got to look out for each other. Matt tries to ask him what happened to their mother, but Mr. Eckert gets a look in his eye that insinuates she was likely killed, and he doesn't directly answer Matt's question as he kind of tears up. Robert attempts to ask him if he knows what happened to his dad, and Mr. Eckert just says he doesn't know. He urges the three of them to get out of the area before they get found, and it's honestly kind of remarkable to me that they are so cavalierly walking around and no one has stopped them yet at all. Like, the most that they've gotten is a passing glance from patrolling officers, but no one has come up and confronted them. Jed tells him that he loves him and he reciprocates, and as the three boys walk away, he shouts out and urges them to avenge him. They head out to a farm that is owned by the Mason family, who I guess is like friends of theirs, and the Masons are elated to see the boys after all that time. Mr. Mason sits down and explains to them that everyone had assumed they had gone to an area called FA by this point. He explains that FA stands for Free America, which is a safe zone from occupying forces. He reveals to them that the farm is an occupied territory, or it's on occupied territory, and it's 40 miles behind enemy line, right in the middle of World War III. Jed explains to Mr. Mason that the reason that they were poking around town is that they were looking for information because they didn't know, like he says that due to how heavily isolated they were from very early on, they had no way of knowing what had been happening while they were gone and wanted to know. Mrs. Mason brings them out food, and Mr. Mason gives them a radio and insists that they not go into Calumet anymore because of the danger it poses to them, especially with everyone looking for them specifically. He explains that many people have been murdered in the area, and the word around there is that the three of them were behind it, which is of course not true. Robert asks Mr. Mason what happened to his father, and it's explained that the enemy forces killed him for aiding guerrilla forces by providing Jed, Matt, and Robert with guns when they were at the store. Of course, Robert gets very upset when he hears the truth about what happened to his father, even though he probably kind of already figured. But Mr. Mason wants them to make sure that they understand the gravity of the situation. And he also says that he doesn't know where Robert's mother is, as Robert is beside himself with grief already over his father. Mr. Mason leads the boys into another room where he pulls up a trapdoor on the floorboards and reveals that he has been hiding his granddaughters, Tony and Erica. They're both played by Jennifer Grey and Leah Thompson, respectively. Mr. Mason explains that enemy troops attempted to have their way with his granddaughters, and he tells the girls that Matt and Jed will take care of them and take them with them, and he doesn't want to know where they're headed to in order to protect himself if he's pressured by enemies. The Masons provide them with horses and they ride off into the distance. The next thing we know, they're all at a bonfire in the woods, and Robert is still very upset about his parents, naturally. And I want to be clear, these other three guys that are with them have such minor parts in this movie. Like, apart from the initial argument they had with Jed, they don't really say much, like maybe a few lines each. But you can just pick up on this awkward tension between them and the three main guys because they, like, the three secondary guys they like don't want to be there and they don't want to go along with all of this. Erica remarks to Tony about how everything is different now and they're very sad with each other in this moment. And I want to be clear also, he just said that they were his granddaughters. We don't know if they're cousins or if they're actually sisters, but I guess it really doesn't matter. One day, a military pickup is driving up the mountain road and is spotted by two of the boys scouting the area near their camp. They go back to warn the rest of the group about the potential trouble. It shows what appear to be high-ranking military officials get out of the vehicle, and it seems like they're actually just there sightseeing for fun on the mountain. One of them is just taking pictures, and another one of them attempts to translate their landmark sign, but he just kind of makes it all up because he clearly doesn't know English super well. The three bad guys find an arrow on the ground and ascertain that it's not something that belongs to a native population because it's made of modern metal. As they look down over a ledge, it's revealed that Erica and Tony are hiding under some of the rocks below, and one of them loses loses their footing and gives away their position. But as the bad guys pursue the girls down the mountain, the boys emerge from the woods and hit one of them with arrows. Another one of the bad guys is killed with a rifle, and the third one is injured and attempts to make his way back to the truck. But when he gets in and attempts to radio for help, Jed comes up, pulls a pistol on him, and shoots him. There is a lot of unease on everyone's faces as they see what Jed just did, but it marks a turning point in them understanding what they need to do to survive. Like, they can't get apprehensive about taking these guys out because they'll have no apprehension in taking them out or taking them hostage. As Robert is sawing off the barrel of his rifle, one of the guys points out that the men that they killed were people, and Robert says, "So was my dad." Jed points out that none of them can ever go home again, and suddenly Matt turns to Erica and tells her to make herself useful by cleaning one of his dishes. But this incites an angry outburst from Erica, who says that her and Tony are never doing any of their washing for them again. And she says that the two of them are as good as any of the boys, and that they're not dealing with their shit anymore. And Matt acts very confused and seemingly believes that he did nothing to deserve such scorn from the two of them, but Tony exclaims that what he said was wrong. And it's like, Matt, you were being a total douchebag by doing that, but he's also an immature teenager, to be fair. It cuts to an enemy base where the colonel from the beginning of the movie is shown explaining to his men that they must not go off alone in the area anymore, as we see the bodies of the dead soldiers or officials, whatever, killed by the boys on the back of a truck. Mayor Bates, who is played by Lane Smith, is shown talking to enemy military leaders in private quarters, pleading with them that although his son is with this guerrilla group who are known to have killed Soviet soldiers, he insists that Daryl is not dangerous and is likely only with the group to survive and surely is anxious to avoid any conflict. These Soviet officials that he's talking to mistake Daryl's background in student government and Eagle Scouts as being some sort of military connection, because I guess that's not a thing in other countries. The two enemy military guys kind of mock the mayor a bit, and it's not clear if the mayor actually understands that he's being mocked, but he has to make nice one way or another. A funeral is held for the dead Soviet soldiers, and many of the Ally parents are lined up to be executed. Basically all of the people, like some of the people I think from that camp and stuff. And these three tanks approach them, and suddenly the group of people who are bracing for their deaths begin singing the song America the Beautiful in defiance of the Soviets. It's revealed that Mr. Eckert is among these people, and we can see some of the boys hiding off in the distance wearing camouflage as they watch the proceedings. Suddenly, men on the tanks open fire, or men, I think they're in front of the tanks, open fire on the Americans, and they all collapse to the ground as the boys who are watching are dumbfounded and horrified by what they're watching. That night, Jed angrily insists that none of the boys cry over what they witnessed, and he tells them that they should let their sadness turn into something else. He particularly focuses his efforts on his brother Matt, who is exceptionally emotional, of course, and everyone in the group seems fearful about their fates. Then it cuts to a different day where a tank is pulling up at a gas station and Tony rides up on her bike. Of course, they harass her and growl at her before stealing her bag, and they allow her to scurry off as they catcall her. But as she gets away, they throw her bag inside the tank and it suddenly explodes, killing one of the Soviet soldiers inside. But as the remaining troops callously go after her without thinking, the boys are set up and ambush them from hidden locations in the terrain and kill the soldiers. This incites yet another mass execution of Americans, but basically, like, when the Soviets find out, they execute more Americans as like retaliation. But as they go to fire at them, the boys kill the executioners and the hostages flee. Robert yells out Wolverines, which is their school mascot, but it becomes their rallying cry. And that's merely the beginning of a sequence of successful guerrilla tactic attacks on the Soviets by the boys, who I will now be referring to as the Wolverines mostly. They attack a group of Soviet soldiers at what appears to be another base of some sort, and they begin spray painting the word Wolverines on a variety of surfaces where they take out the Soviets. The colonel surveys the damage at the base afterward and is getting increasingly frustrated by his inability to prevent the Wolverines' strikes. He proceeds to talk later on what appears to be he talks to what appears to be a general in town about the situation, and a building explodes behind them while they're talking. This stretch of the movie really demonstrates the way the Wolverines are devastating and pissing off the Soviets. We see Erica on a ledge with a gun looking out from the mountain, and she wanders over and finds a soldier laying on the ground with his parachute, and he's played by Powers Booth. We get an incredible exchange as she asks him if he's American, and she tries to verify this by asking him what the capital of Texas is. But when he says Austin, she points the gun at him threateningly, like he's wrong, and she says that it's Houston. But he finally convinces her to let him up because, by the way, the capital of Texas is Austin. I could probably recite all 50 if I tried, but I'm not going to do that because you don't want to hear that. So now this soldier pilot guy is sitting with the Wolverines at the campfire, and Jed comes up and asks him how he got shot down. And the guy says that it was 5 against 1 and he got 4 of the enemy fighters before he was taken out. Jed laughs and shakes his hand, and the guy introduces himself as Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Tanner of the United States Air Force. Tanner eventually walks the group through what happened leading up to the war breaking out because they obviously don't really know the whole story. Like Mr. Mason filled them in a little bit. He explains that the Soviets came in disguised as commercial charter flights that were actually crack airborne outfits who took paths through the Rockies. And this was actually another real world fear at the time. Western intelligence was genuinely concerned that the Soviets would use civilian commercial flights to smuggle Spetsnaz, or special forces from Soviet Union, into key U.S. airports to seize them from within. He says that they used missiles to take out silos in the Dakotas and key communication points around the country. He says the Cubans and Nicaraguans came through Mexico and started to wreak havoc. The boys ask about Europe's involvement in the war, and Tanner says that they must have reckoned that the 2 world wars they went through in the same century were more than enough, so they decided to just sit this one out. But he says that England has started to get involved, but that they won't last long. However, he says that the Soviets wanted to take America out completely in one go. He says that at this point, the battle lines have pretty much stabilized and that the war has become pretty conventional now that the initial attacks are complete. But when Tanner is asked if there's anyone else that is actually on the American side, he says that there are 600 million screaming Chinamen. Robert says that he thought it was 1 billion in the Chinese population, and Tanner simply says that it was, alluding to the notion that it's not that many anymore, and that also suggests the possibility that the Soviets nuked the Chinese and killed roughly 400 million people in an effort to dissuade China from joining the war on the side of the United States, because obviously that would be pretty problematic for the Soviets. They ask Tanner if he has a family, and he says he doesn't know anymore because they got caught behind the lines down in Texas, and he likes to think that they're still alive, but he's not sure because he's heard certain stories about what they're doing to civilians. The next morning, they wake Tanner up early, and it immediately cuts to the Wolverines attacking more Soviet troops from the cover of the forest. The systematic way they plan the battles includes rigged claymores placed strategically near where they deliberately drive the enemies into. By the way, the M18A1 Claymore is a command-detonated directional anti-personnel mine used by the U.S. military to defend perimeters and ambush enemy infantry. It consists of a curved green plastic casing filled with 1.5 pounds of C4 explosive and 700 roughly steel bolts, which are blasted in a 60-degree arc up to 100 meters, typically activated by an observer. After they claim victory over the Soviets on the mountain road, they're sitting at a campfire that night, and Tanner reminds them all that whether or not they believe it, they have things a lot better than a lot of people do, even in the immediate area around them. He says that people in Denver have been under siege for months now, and they live on sawdust bread and rats and have been driven to cannibalism in some cases. Tanner stands up and walks by Robert, who is carving into the stock of his rifle with a knife, And Tanner just tells him that all of his anger is going to burn him up eventually. But Robert says that his anger keeps him warm. Then he looks up and asks if they're doing right in what they're doing, and Tanner doesn't really answer and just walks away. The next morning, Tanner is out looking at names of the dead members of the boys' families that are carved into some rocks. Like this whole rock formation has all these names carved into it. And Erica suddenly runs up and holds out a flower to Tanner, and he holds one out to her, but they're like way too far away from each other, and she just runs away silently. Tanner points out that she doesn't say much, and one of the boys remarks that something happened to her, and that's why she behaves the way she does now. It's now December, and Tanner is walking through the strategy of their next attack by making a makeshift map, but he gets frustrated by the fact that many of the kids don't understand his military lingo, including flanking maneuver. A flanking maneuver is a military tactic where an attacking force strikes the sides or flanks or rear of an enemy formation rather than engaging their heavily defended front. It's designed to exploit weak points, cause panic, and surround the enemy, often turning the tide of a battle. Then we almost immediately see them carry out the attack that they were planning, and they manage to free several civilian prisoners from the base where they attack. We get a lot of really cool explosions throughout the sequence, and in the aftermath, the frustrated Soviets execute many more hostages. Later on, the Wolverines are hanging out in a field playing football, and things get fairly flirty between Tanner and Erica as she asks him about his wife and what she's like. The next thing we know, all of them are at the Mason's house again, and Mr. Mason explains that to Jed that he has become a bit of a legend and he's known about even outside the area, potentially even as far away as California. He says he's heard rumblings that there's some kind of intention to drop Green Berets in the area to in the spring to help out with the Wolverines' like stuff that they're doing. The U.S. Army Special Forces, known as the Green Berets, are elite special operations forces specializing in unconventional warfare, foreign internal defense, and special reconnaissance. I really struggled through that, but I think you got the gist. As highly trained, small team, quiet professionals, they operate globally to train indigenous forces, conduct counterterrorism, and perform direct action missions. But unfortunately, Jed is not optimistic about that possibility of getting help and knows that they have to basically plan like it won't happen because there's a lot of winter to go. Shortly after that, they hear a sonic boom and they realize that there are American fighter jets bombing an area in the distance. Jed remarks in disbelief that Tanner has to cross that area because this is not very well delivered from a storytelling perspective, but basically it's like Tanner is going to break off and stop working with the Wolverines and he's going to go off on his own. And I don't know if he's going to find his family or what. And Tanner explains that this area is a legitimate battlefield and the attacks are just ongoing. Tanner tries to convince Jed to come with him and to quit what he's doing by pleading with him that he likely wants to be able to grow old, but Jed doesn't feel as though he can give up now. Suddenly a tank approaches the group, but it has its sights set on the attacks in the distance, and the Wolverines are able to find cover behind a hill in front of where the tank stops. The tank fires its cannon over their heads, but suddenly a second tank arrives nearby, and there's a constant back and forth of fire between the two tanks and this American tank across the way. But when Tanner climbs up onto the tank nearest them, he attempts to break into it and kill whoever's operating it, but someone inside opens the hatch and tosses a grenade out before closing it back, and the explosion from the grenade injures and eventually kills Tanner, and Erica is very upset by this naturally. Upon seeing this, the Wolverines are forced to flee and leave Tanner behind. Then, of course, at the campfire later, Erica is overwhelmed with grief and says that she'll never love anybody again, but Robert reminds her that if she didn't ever love anybody, she wouldn't even be here. And I'm also thinking, like, come the fuck on, Erica. Can you possibly believe that you were in love with Tanner? Like, based on what we saw, I don't fucking think so. The group has a bit of a memorial for Tanner, and it's obviously very somber because it's not a fucking birthday party. At one point, Robert walks out and sits with Jed while he's on watch duty and suggests that Jed should get some sleep. Jed very callously suggests that a death in the group was bound to happen eventually, and Robert points out how lean on feelings Jed is getting, but Jed says that he can't afford to have too many feelings. February rolls around and there's some kind of parade slash march going through town, led by a Soviet guy in a baby blue beret leading a bunch of other similarly dressed soldiers. The troops convene in some kind of town hall and they discuss their position in the war, and the guy leading the discussion explains that the narrative they have basically been spinning is this super positive seeming one, but the reality is that they're not exterminating the enemy well enough to be able to say that they're even on the road to victory yet. He specifically calls out the fact that the Wolverines have caused them so many problems. By the way, this guy's name is Colonel Strelnikov, and he's with the special forces for the Soviets. He uses a metaphor where he explains that if a fox comes and steals your chickens, you don't kill your pig for it when you see the fox, basically pointing out that their response to every attack from the Wolverines has been to execute a bunch of hostages as an act of vengeance, and he says that the better strategy would be to find where the Wolverines have been living and take them out at the source. The next thing we know, a team of soldiers are trekking through the wilderness on the mountain in white gear, attempting to locate the Wolverines where they're hiding, keeping in mind there's snow on the ground because it's winter. But the Wolverines are prepared, and when they see them approaching, they begin firing at them and mow them down with machine guns and explosives. At one point, when they have completely wiped out seemingly all the Soviets, they stand up and begin walking into the woods and locate one surviving soldier. They end up taking him hostage and bring him to the campfire where they interrogate him about a radio device that they found that the Soviets clearly used to locate them somehow, but they can't figure out how to get it to work. They try to find out what the device is and how it was used, but the language barrier makes it impossible, so they figure out how to activate the device and realize it's tied to a tracker, and when they follow it, it does that continuous beeping noise where it gets more the beeps are more frequent and close together and high pitched as you get closer, and they basically realize that there is some kind of tracker on Daryl somewhere. Daryl is one of the secondary shitty guys that no one cares about. Jed angrily confronts Daryl, and Daryl confesses that he went into town to see his father against Jed's wishes, but by this point his dad was completely brainwashed, so Daryl's dad turned him into the KGB, who forced Daryl to swallow the tracking device, and then he was released to go back and rejoin the Wolverines. And say what you will, but it's kind of fucked up that he actually went back and basically did what the Soviets wanted him to do. He could have just not gone back to them. You know what I mean? You have to believe that you're going to die if you go back with them anyway, or a fate worse than death. Jed and the others take Daryl and the Soviet soldier off into the field with the intention of executing them, despite pleas regarding the fact that the Geneva Convention does not allow this kind of act. And to clarify what that means, the Geneva Convention states that the killing of unarmed prisoners is a violation of humanitarian law because killing in this way is a more willful and deliberate act than battle killings. It's basically like murder. So in order for them to execute these guys now while they're defenseless and they're killing them deliberately for this reason, it's more like murder. It's a war crime. They eventually execute the Soviet and Daryl, which seems to mark a major turning point in the morality of the Wolverines' actions, because now they're behaving more like the Soviet invaders and less like civil human beings in order to survive. They somberly walk away from the scene, and Jed is clearly distraught by his own actions. He breaks down and cries, and eventually Jed and Matt are watching a group of Soviet trucks on a road in the distance, and they ready some major weapons like a missile launcher to fire at them. It occurred to me, I think they've all been missile launchers. I don't think I've seen an actual bazooka in this movie, but Jed stops Matt from launching as the trucks drive away and leave supplies on the road behind them. So Jed sends Tony down to check out what they left, and it appears to be boxes of food, but this feels like such a complete trap of some sort and doesn't make much sense that it happened otherwise. Why would they just drive up, drop food on the road, even if it's like rotten or something. Like, it just, why would they drop it in the middle of nowhere? The rest of the group comes down and collects the boxes of food and heads over to a nearby rock formation to eat what they collected. But suddenly, as they begin joking around, Jed can hear an undeniable sound of a helicopter approaching, and it opens fire with machine guns on them. So obviously the food thing was like a planned trap kind of thing. Tony is hit by multiple shots as they're forced to drag her away and retreat, and there are now at least 2 helicopters firing on them. This whole sequence, it's very tough for me to tell exactly how many there are supposed to be total at any given time. They jump on their horses and attempt to get away, but the choppers are able to pursue them very quickly, obviously. Tony falls off the horse that she's riding on with Jed, and he has to double back and pick her up again. Robert aims his rocket launcher and takes out the gunner in one of the helicopters, but when the other comes back toward him, Robert unloads his machine gun on it in a futile attempt to bring it down. But the helicopter takes Robert out pretty easily, and we see that there were probably 3 helicopters. I mean, we know for sure 3 at this point, but honestly, I'm having a hard time. There might have even been 4 at one point. It cuts back to Jed with Tony, who's dying under a tree, and she's urging him to just kill her because if the Soviets capture her, they'll try and make her talk. But he just tenderly caresses her cheek and doesn't actually kill her, and he just leaves her for dead under the tree. We see the helicopters have landed nearby, and the Soviets proclaim that they swear they killed 12 enemies, but Colonel Strelnikov, I'm sorry, I have a hard time saying that one, insists that he only saw 1 actual enemy confirmed killed. One of the other soldiers finds Tony under the tree, dead, but when he goes to lift her, he realizes her body was rigged with an explosive that was triggered by moving her. After this movie was released, the Guinness Book of World Records named Red Dawn the most violent movie ever made. It averaged about 134 acts of violence per hour, which is basically 1 every 30 seconds on average. But like as I was watching this, it didn't feel anywhere near as persistent as that. It seems as though those acts of violence are more concentrated in certain moments, and then they're just adding up in those short spurts. Matt devises a plan while Jed is away, with the other 2 remaining Wolverines, Erica and Danny, I think is his name, and he wants to have them wait until the Soviets return to town so they can head off to the plains. They ask what he plans to do, and he says that he and Jed are all used up, basically saying like they're lost causes, and that he'll create a diversion so that the 2 of them can get away safely. He explains that it's critical that with so few of them remaining, that at least a couple of them can actually survive. Eventually, when Jed and Matt are alone together, Matt suggests that the 2 of them have faced tougher odds and won, and that they might be able to make it out alive. And we get this really heartfelt moment between the 2 brothers where they say that they love one another. Suddenly, they unleash an attack on the Soviet base in town, catching them by surprise as carnage is just unleashed. Jed and Matt are loaded up with weapons as they begin to have their 2-man blitz of the town. During the chaos, Jed has a standoff with Strelnikov, and they both rapidly fire upon each other, and Jed manages to survive his wounds, at least for a while, and get away and find this basically mortally wounded Matt. And as he carries Matt away, Colonel Bella, whatever it is, holds them up, but elects not to kill them and lets go. Basically the narrative here is supposed to be that he's like defeated, or like he's just he's seeing the frivolousness and pointlessness of the war and all the things that have happened. So Jed stumbles off and lays Matt down nearby and repeatedly tells him Daddy will be there soon, and holds him as he remarks on how tired he is. Then we see the 2 survivors, Erica and Danny, trekking off into the wilderness, and a voiceover from Erica explains that she now visits this spot often, and it shows a plaque from this. It's basically the area where they were carving the names into the rocks, so it's called Partisan Rock, and it's that location, so it's just sitting outside of there. And the plaque says the following: in the early days of World War III, guerrillas, mostly children, placed the names of their lost upon this rock. They fought here alone and gave up their lives so that this nation shall not perish from the earth. And we roll credits. Okay, so trivia for this movie. 5 of the 36 paratroopers in the beginning of the film got blown as much as a mile off course during filming. One got stuck in a tree and had to convince locals that he wasn't really an enemy soldier. C. Thomas Howell had been a rodeo cowboy. He helped teach the rest of the cast to ride horses. Patrick Swayze got frostbite during filming. A few years later, he said it still felt like someone shoving toothpicks up his fingernails when he got too cold. The plot, a Soviet and Cuban invasion from Mexico, was based on CIA and war college studies of U.S. weaknesses at the time. The film contains no computer graphics effects, chroma key composites, or miniatures. All of the explosions are real and actual size. The film made the Guinness Book of World Records for the most acts of violence. I already mentioned this. It added up to about 2.23 per minute was what the average ended up being. The actors trained using real weapons so that they wouldn't make mistakes using the prop ones. Leah Thompson recalled, "We went to a firing range and there was every kind of gun you could imagine there. Real Green Berets helped with the actors' boot camp training. William Smith didn't receive any special language training for his role. Thanks to years of military service and work with the CIA and NSA, Smith was already fluent in Russian and several other languages." Don't even know who William Smith was. I could probably find out. Oh, he played Strelnikov. Okay, that's great. The cast underwent an intense 8-week military training course before filming started. Patrick Swayze stayed in character throughout filming. He said, "I became Jed Eckert," which, I mean, let's be honest, how much character was there that was like that crazy to like, oh, I'm going to method act this one. The story was originally to be set in the real town of Calumet, Michigan, which is it's in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. It was moved to a fictional version of Calumet, Colorado. It was a more central location within the United States, which better fit the story. In real life, Calumet, Colorado is a tiny former mining town that was abandoned in the 1970s. The dogshit remake from 2012 was partially filmed in my hometown of Grand Ledge, Michigan, at Fitzgerald Park, I believe, on the ledges somewhere. Jennifer Grey and Patrick Swayze didn't actually get along during this shoot. She said Swayze was apparently a drill sergeant on set, which makes their later chemistry in Dirty Dancing even more of an acting miracle, even though I seem to remember reading that they didn't get along on the set of that movie very well either. I had no IMDb nuggets for this movie, so on to info and ratings. Opening weekend, 8.2 million. Worldwide gross, 38.4 million. IMDb rating, 6.3. Letterboxd rating, 3.0. Rotten Tomato critics score, 48%. Rotten Tomato audience score, 65%. Personal rating, 3.5 out of 5 stars. Praise for this movie. I do love the compelling concept of this movie and the way it's able to feel so exciting as the premise unfolds. I love the cast of this movie, and the performances are solid given the subject matter at hand. It's a little cartoonishly over the top, but the performances fit it. Criticism: this is the first time I have watched this in a while, and it does feel like what is pretty much a propaganda film in retrospect. The movie is also very poorly paced in certain spots and doesn't conclude in a particularly satisfying way. And overall, kind of like I mentioned, there's like a lot of storytelling issues where it's just like, I can't remember who people are and people are just doing stuff and it's just happening. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I don't really remember what the relevance of this was. All right, everyone. Thank you for stopping by. I do appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day. Bye now.